Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Bob Bruner, the Dean of the Darden School, and on behalf of the community of the Darden School, I welcome all of our guests and visitors to this event. Our guest speaker today is Ken Thompson, Chairman, President, and CEO of Wachovia Corporation. The story of Wachovia's phenomenal expansion and success in such a remarkably brief time in the recent years is bound directly to Ken's leadership and vision. Under Ken's leadership, Wachovia has seen unparalleled growth, primarily through mergers and acquisitions. This strategy has led to expanded business lines and successful geographic penetration into new markets. The corporate strategy has resulted in dramatic improvements in customer satisfaction, which continues to fuel strong organic revenue and earnings growth. Ken's success story with Wachovia goes back to 2000, when he was appointed CEO of the former First Union Corporation in Charlotte, North Carolina. Wachovia at the time was headquartered in Winston-Salem. The banks announced plans to merge in April 2001, and less than a month later, Atlanta-based SunTrust launched a rival and ultimately unsuccessful takeover bid for Wachovia. SunTrust had long been seen as a potential bidder for Wachovia, and the next few months provided no shortage of news material for the major business publications in this country. Students of M&A deals, where rival suitors are involved, may find this case to be a highly educational and compelling story. First Union and Wachovia completed their merger on September 4, 2001. Now, under Ken's leadership, Wachovia has gone on to complete many more acquisitions, including the $14.3 billion purchase of former competitor South Trust in Alabama, Westcorp in Southern California, and the $25.5 billion acquisition of Golden West Financial. Wachovia has also acquired Prudential Financial's brokerage business. Most recently, in May of this year, Wachovia announced plans to acquire retail brokerage firm A.G. Edwards for $6.8 billion. Today, Wachovia is the fifth largest bank in the United States by market capitalization and the third largest full-service brokerage firm based on client assets. For the second quarter of 2007, Wachovia reported record earnings of $2.34 billion, with earnings per share up 4% year over year. All four of the company's major business units produced double-digit earnings growth during the second quarter. Ken guides the Wachovia success story at every bend in the road. In 2003 and 2005, he was named one of Businessweek's best managers. He was named Banker of the Year in 2005 by the American Banker newspaper. In his 31 years with First Union and Wachovia, Ken has served in leadership positions in the corporate and investment bank operations, human resources, and Florida and Georgia banking operations. He received his bachelor's degree from that other school in University of North Carolina, and his MBA from another Southern business school, Wake Forest University. Please join me in extending a very warm welcome to Mr. Ken Thompson.
Thank you. Thank you. Can you hear me in the back? Thank you, Dean Bruner, very much. It's a pleasure to be here. It's always wonderful to come to this beautiful place and to be in front of students at the Darden School, where we get so many great leaders at Wachovia. So thanks for your invitation to me, and I'm delighted to be here. And I've learned coming here that you must start off your presentation with a quote from Thomas Jefferson. So I'm going to do that perfunctory thing. I was looking for a good quote, and literally the first one I turned to in a book of quotes that I came to, I didn't like much. It said, and I quote, "I sincerely believe that banking institutions are more dangerous than standing armies." I found that not to be an inspiring quote, but Fortunately, Jefferson lived a long time, and he was pretty prolific, and he left a rich legacy of opinions. So I found one that I like, and I'm betting you're going to like this one too. It says, Jefferson says, "Speeches that are measured by the hour will die within the hour." So I promise you my remarks are going to be denominated in minutes, not hours. But I would like to spend a few minutes with you talking about three current issues that are facing Wachovia, they're facing the financial industry, and really they're facing all companies in the business world. And after I do that, I want to share a few thoughts on the kind of leaders that we need in order to negotiate the future. And I believe we need leaders who will do more than lead through change. We need leaders at Wachovia, for sure, who will be ahead of change. So let me go to the first issue that I talked about, and that's globalization. When I joined Wachovia 32 years ago, it was a small North Carolina bank, and our business was primarily shaped by the top industries in the state of North Carolina at that time: tobacco, textiles, and apparel. And we were largely unaffected by economies of faraway lands. In fact, back then, when someone said something that was totally off the subject, we would say, "What does that have to do with the price of eggs in China?" Meaning, of course, that the price of eggs in China were completely irrelevant to the matter at hand. And I would simply say that today the price of eggs in China are much more relevant to Wachovia than what's going on in the tobacco business in North Carolina. Many of you have probably read Thomas Friedman's book, The World is Flat. I can't imagine a business school student that hasn't read that. This concept of a flat world is an important factor as we chart strategy at Wachovia. Every time we make a decision about where work should be done, where technology should be sourced, or where we should invest for growth, we must consider the entire globe. And I know that our competitors are searching the world for the best, most cost-effective locations to process work, and we would be at an incredible disadvantage if we weren't doing the same thing. And our competitors are selling financial products in faster-growing international markets. How can we provide our shareholders with top earnings growth and with good returns if we are not similarly optimistic and going after those fast-growing markets? Globalization is very exciting, and it literally opens a world of possibilities. But I got to tell you, it can also add a world of complexity to the decisions we make, and it introduces greater risk to our business. But succeeding in a global economy requires excellent judgment in weighing risk and reward, and that's something that I'll talk about a little later because that's something we're looking for in good leaders. The second issue that I'll talk about is improving the environment, or as we call it at Wachovia, becoming greener. Not so long ago, you couldn't find a financial institution who would have considered environmental problems as their issue. We don't dump chemicals into rivers, and we don't pollute the atmosphere. But we are a significant user of resources in operating our buildings, with paper that we print, and with the supplies that we consume. So we began an extensive recycling program at Wachovia several years ago. In the last year, we recycled 20,000 tons of paper at Wachovia alone and 22,000 toner cartridges. That makes a difference in the world. We also consume more energy than I thought possible, and we've committed to reduce carbon emissions at Wachovia by 10% by the year 2010. We are also committing that every financial center we build going forward will be a green building. And those are all direct actions that we can take and that should help control and improve the environment. But we can do more than that. We can innovate to help the environment. We can examine our lending policies. For example, we now have a mortgage that cuts rates if a home is a green home. And we don't want to lend to companies that are doing things to pollute the environment. So we won't lend to companies that are logging in protected areas, for example. Clearly, improving the environment is an issue for the entire world, not just for financial services or Wachovia, but we are eager to play our part and to play a leading part in taking meaningful actions that will produce real results. The third issue is in large part about you, or at least many of you. We're faced with new challenges as multiple generations coexist in the workforce and in our workplace. And succeeding with multiple generations in the workplace is so crucial that intergenerational strategies is one of our top human resource priorities at Wachovia this year. That means developing ways to keep valuable, experienced employees, and these are primarily baby boom employees, as they grow older, and at the same time attracting new employees who represent the future. The most recent generation we are welcoming as employees and customers is Gen Y, and that's probably many of you in this room. Gen Yers are known as ambitious, demanding, high-maintenance employees who question everything. Does that sound familiar? They're also anticipated to be one of the most high-performing workforces in the history of the world. You have more information in your heads and at your fingertips than anyone who has come before you. But we know this: you work differently, and you consume differently, and you want a different kind of balance in your lives than most of us baby boomers do or did when we entered the workforce in the 1970s. It's clear that we need you. 64 million skilled workers from the baby boom generation will be able to retire by the end of this decade. What's not so clear is whether companies will be nimble in recruiting and retaining you and your fellow Gen Yers. And I can promise you at Wachovia, we're spending a lot of effort and thought and time on exactly that. To be successful, we need leaders who not only know how to develop talent, but who are passionate about helping to create tomorrow's leaders. So the three issues that I've just mentioned are macro trends that are shaping our future. Now, if you lay on top of those three big macro trends the violent storm that we've had over the past several months in the financial market, you've got a fascinating course to navigate as you enter the workforce. I'm sure you're all aware of the current credit crunch and liquidity crisis, but I thought I'd give you a banker's perspective on it anyway. So I'll take you back to the year 2000, when the tech bubble burst and the stock market plummeted. At that time, the Federal Reserve lowered rates to calm the market and make it easier for businesses and people to spend money. And perhaps they made it a little too easy. Corporate profits increased, and there was an explosion in global liquidity. Markets went up, and people apparently forgot that volatility is eventually inescapable. There was so much money floating around looking for yield that people also forgot what risk looked like. The premium paid for taking risk dropped sharply. In fact, the difference between the yield for a U.S. government bond and a junk bond of the same maturity decreased from 9 points to 2.5 points between 2001 and 2007. The lack of discrimination among different levels of risk was evident in other areas as well. Private equity funds borrowed heavily to pay escalating prices for companies they sought to fix and sell. Investment banks were eager to deploy excess funds by buying mortgages that they packaged and sold. And the high level of demand for mortgages drove many mortgage lenders to make loans that were inadequately collateralized and poorly structured. When housing prices began to fall steeply, borrowers became stressed, and the credit crunch snaked its way from individual borrowers to investment banks, to hedge funds, and to investors of all classes. And every day you can hear someone on CNBC expounding that these are unprecedented times. In some ways, today's credit crunch is different. Most notably, I go back to my statement earlier, what does that have to do with the price of eggs in China? Today we might ask, What does a subprime mortgage originated in Nevada in 2006 have to do with the collapse of a German bank in 2007? And the answer is, as you know from your education at Darden, that risk is more widely distributed today than it's ever been in the history of the world. We do have a global market, and that presents new challenges to determine where is it that the risk resides. And that results in uncertainty that breeds fear and can turn into panic. However, in many ways, all financial bubbles are alike, and I've just gotten your dean's book on the 1907 panic, and I'm looking forward to reading it because I need some lessons right now on how they are alike. They all start with too much cash. Then investors get carried away and make poor investments. Risk comes home to roost. People lose money, and there's inevitable market disruption. But the story does not end there. Prices decline and volatility may be unpleasant, but they also bring opportunity. And that's where we are. We are going through the crisis, but we see incredible opportunity. And the winners are the ones who will accept that opportunity and find it and take advantage of it. Even today, as we go through the liquidity crisis at Wachovia, we have teams of people who are not looking backwards, but are looking for assets that can be purchased at yields that were impossible to get over the last 5 years. So let me turn now to leadership, and I'm nearing an end here, and we'll get to the question and answers. What kind of leaders can steer not just through, but ahead of issues that I've discussed today? And I'm not going to recite from leadership books because I'd rather read history and biography to get lessons. But the brand of leadership I'm talking about isn't in a leadership book. In our case, it's Wachovia Homegrown Leadership Criteria. And first, it's important to understand the construct of our leadership model. It's really a very simple construct. It says, lead yourself, lead the team, lead the business. And if you think about leadership in that way, it doesn't depend on how many people you supervise. Even if you have no direct reports, you are leading yourself, you are influencing the team, and you are helping to lead the business. As our management team grapples with tough issues like the ones I've talked about today, we recognize that the most crucial factor for success will be how well do we lead. And yet, while we all agree on that, we also realize that the simple statement, great leader, can mean many different things to different people. And that's why our management committee literally devoted 2 days of considerable time defining what we mean by great leaders at Wachovia. And we came up with 6 characteristics to identify high potential associates in our company. So here are the 6 characteristics that we described for high potential leaders at Wachovia. First, a great leader has deep passion for the business and the company and a positive, optimistic attitude. Having passion does not mean working 14-hour days, but it does mean you have a genuine love of the work that is contagious and creates followership. And people with this characteristic are doing just fine with the current market turmoil because they find it enthralling to be in the middle of it, and they see the opportunities in the midst of the storm. Second, a great leader has high integrity, authenticity, and self-awareness, and is team-oriented. This speaks largely to the values of Wachovia, and I expect on the surface they're not so different from the values at other companies, but I do believe that we are unusual in how actively we consult our values in making decisions in the way we run the business. And I can promise you at Wachovia, to get ahead, a great leader must put the team over himself or herself. Third, great leaders exercise judgment. They have the ability to weigh risk-reward and they can consider multiple constituencies as they make decisions. We live in a world of ambiguity where few decisions are black and white. One of the most challenging parts of my job as CEO is considering multiple constituencies as I make decisions: shareholders, customers, investors, the various communities we serve. And it's not always easy to please all of those constituencies, so it takes judgment and it takes the ability to think on your feet. Fourth, great leaders are strategically focused. They understand the financial underpinnings of the business, they learn quickly, and they grasp complex issues. Especially in today's global economy, it takes a lot of gray matter to comprehend the complexity and speed of change that represents our operating reality. Fifth, a great leader aggressively executes. He or she has a bias for action, sweats the details, and is always, always there in the clutch. This is a person you always want on your team when the chips are down. You can have all the brain power in the world, but if no one acts, you can't get the job done. And a footnote on the fourth and fifth characteristic: they can seem contradictory to people. On the one hand, it's important to be strategic. On the other hand, it's important to sweat the details. And I'd just say that the footnote is that it's important to know the right time to stay high level and the right time to dive into the weeds. And finally, number 6, it's all about people. Great leaders have a nose for talent. They find talent, they develop people, and they export talent to other parts of the company. In other words, it's not all about you. It's about your ability to mentor, teach, and lead by example. And it's about doing that for individuals who are diverse with respect to race, gender, sexual orientation, and any other differences that are there. At Wachovia, we believe that these 6 qualities are the material from which great leaders will be made. And as you pursue your studies and consider your career, one thing you can be sure of is that the world will get more complex and change will be more rapid when you go to work. I know you will face that future well equipped with knowledge and the courage to lead ahead of change, not during change. Thanks for the invitation, and I've got plenty of time for questions and answers, and this is the best part anyway, so please ask me a question or two.
If you've got a question for Ken, if you want to raise your hand and come over here, and I'll give you the mic.
Right here.
You mentioned something very interesting that you had to exercise, as a leader, one has to exercise judgment. Going back in your tenure as a CEO, can you give an example of a decision that you had to make and you had to exercise judgment? And what were the difficulties you faced while making that decision?
Yeah. I think that as a CEO, some of the situations where your judgment is most challenged is on big acquisitions. You have an opportunity to do something that can strategically change the corporation, and you desperately want to do it, but price is important. What it'll do to your existing shareholders is important. How you can put the companies together is important. And so you've got all of these competing things that go on, and they all literally have to be determined in a matter of sometimes hours, sometimes days, sometimes, if you're lucky, weeks. But literally at that point in time, you have to know who on your team you're going to listen to, who you think has the right inputs, and then you've got to, at the end of the day, after your board approves it, you've got to sort of look at yourself and make a judgment as to whether it's the right thing for the company. And that, to me, is probably the most lonely time as a CEO, and it is when it really gets down to you have a binary decision to make, and you've got to make that judgment. And it's a huge risk-reward opportunity for your company.
Thank you. I'm very curious about your macro trends and how you as a CEO develop them with your team. There are certainly a number of things that people could come up to you and say, this is the macro trend, Mr. Thompson, this is what we need to focus on. But since you do put behind it a lot of resources, time, and effort, how do you narrow it down and then make sure that your company is following through in the short term, midterm, and long term?
Yeah.
Thank you.
We do that with, I was telling Dean Bruner how much respect I have for our management committee. We've got 11 people on our management committee, and they are really good. And we spend a lot of time as a group talking about how we are going to respond to macro trends like globalization, like the environment, like which businesses to be in and which not to be in. And a lot of that is done in very unstructured time together. And a lot of it is done literally by traveling together on airplanes and constantly talking about the business. We do the same thing with our board of directors. We spend a lot of time making sure that they understand the businesses we're in. We try to lay out demographics and trends so that they understand them, and then we want their feedback. We desperately want their feedback. So it's a very iterative process of discussion, arguments, people pounding on the table, some people being quiet, and you have to pull it out of them. But it's just it's an ongoing, all the time discussion, and then judgments have to be made. But we have one philosophy that's important. We think that demographics drive a lot, and so we think we can be incredibly good at growth. But if we've gotten ourselves into a no-growth market, we're not going to be as good as we are. We're not going to look as good as we are. So one of the things that drives us on the big trends is go for growth. Go where growth is possible. And that makes global more important for us today than it's ever been. Yes?
One of the issues about becoming a leader, it's really, you start out and a lot of people want to become a rainmaker or a high performer, and then changing to that leadership role is really different and probably pretty uncomfortable and takes a steep learning curve, I imagine. How did you go about doing that? What challenges did you face?
You know, it's an interesting question because I grew up in a bank where the way you got ahead was you were a rainmaker. You developed a lot of business. You produced a lot of revenue. And what happens is sometimes people that are really good at that, as you know, aren't necessarily good at getting a team to do that. And so there's a winnowing out process that occurs. And one of the things that I have to check myself on all the time is when to get involved in business development and when to back up from it. And we all do what we like to do. I really believe that one of the things about leading and managing is you have to understand that sometimes you have to do more of the stuff you don't like to do and let other people do the things you like to do. And so I check myself all the time on trying to get too involved in doing deals or in being a rainmaker. There are other people that have more time to do that and can do it well, and I need to provide them the resources, but not try to do it myself.
You mentioned that you get a lot of your leadership from reading biographies. I was kind of curious as to what's your favorite and how do you try to emulate that person?
Well, I try to take a little bit from everyone I read. So I think my all-time favorite is Winston Churchill. I've read way too many books on Winston Churchill. My favorite is a book called The Last Lion, which is a 2-volume set by William Manchester. And what I love about Churchill is the way that the conviction that he had and the willingness to persevere even when it appeared that everybody had lost faith in him, and ultimately he saved the free world in World War II. So he's a favorite of mine, but gosh, I'll read any biography that I pick up. I'm reading a new book out now called Ike on Dwight Eisenhower. I just finished reading a book called Bill and Dave about the 2 guys who founded Hewlett-Packard. So I just love reading other people's stories, and I feel that I can get some inspiration from almost anybody.
Hi, I'm a fellow Tar Heel, so go Tar Heels. I work in the medical center and I love coming over here to hear these talks, because so much in healthcare we are not guided by business in the same way that other businesses are. And I noticed that you're on the board of Carolina's Medical Center, or the Carolinas Health System. What can you tell us about banking that, from your role as the CEO, that will help us in healthcare to make our business better?
I believe that fierce competition is a good thing, and I think my political leanings may leak out here, but I just think less government intervention and more free market would be a good thing for the healthcare system. On the other hand, I'm not a complete free marketer. I'm praying right now the Fed's going to cut rates next week. So I think there's a place for both, but I do think that that more consumer choice and more putting the financial repercussions on educating and then letting consumers choose will be a good thing in healthcare.
I'll be right over.
I can just go ahead.
All right.
Okay.
First, congratulations on the success that you've had. With the market the way it is right now, wouldn't want to be in your shoes. Especially with the banks and the brokers about to report next week. With that in mind, let's say I got like $100 million in Wachovia.
Right.
And I just heard Buffett just increase his holdings in Bank of America,
Yeah.
Wells Fargo, and whatnot. With everything that's going on, and I came to you, what would be the number one thing that you would say to me that would keep me invested in Wachovia?
I would say to you that what's going on in the financial industry right now greatly favors big universal banks. It is very helpful to have a big balance sheet and a big deposit base, and the last 6 or 7 weeks is a perfect example of that. There are monoline companies who are being strangled to death right now because of lack of liquidity, and there are monoline companies in our industry that don't have a capital base so that they can take advantage of the opportunities that are there now as we come through this liquidity crisis that haven't been there for a decade. We are, as I said, we've got teams of bankers right now who are focused on buying distressed assets at yields that have been impossible to get in the past. But you got to have capital and you got to have liquidity to do that. And so we've got literally, I get excited thinking about the opportunities that we are going to have for the next 6 months. On the one hand, I'm schizophrenic. On the one hand, I want the liquidity crisis to end, and on the other hand, I know that we are benefiting from it every day that it's here. So I'm buying. I'm not pushing the stock, but I'm a buyer.
With that said, I know we have no way of knowing this. Do you think we're going to get another
You know, it's hard to predict. I've been in banking for 32 years now. I've been through a few crises. I started in 75, 76, and that was a deep depression in the financial industry. But I don't think there's been anything between then and now that's been as serious as what we're going through today. The markets are completely locked up. There's fear in the market, and the reason there's fear in the market is because innovation has created all of these financial instruments, and it's created all of these private buyers of risk, hedge funds, conduits, sieves, the things you're reading about now. And no investor really knows who's going to blow up and who's not going to blow up. And so when that happens, liquidity dries up and people start hoarding cash, and that's what's going on now. LIBOR is sky high because even banks won't lend money to each other right now until they get a little more sunlight on what's going on. Yeah. I wish I could say it's all going to be over by the time you go to work in the financial industry, but I can't promise that. Yes?
You mentioned that you're waiting to see the Fed's cut rate coming up this week, and I understand that is necessary to pump more liquidity in the market and help you guys function and make more money, but are you concerned at all that that can be seen as a bailout and foster another cycle of people making investments that you have?
Yeah, that's a huge debate that's going on right now, is will we create what they call moral hazard by bailing out people. And I think the Fed they have to walk a tightrope on this because they have a responsibility to protect the economy, but they don't have a responsibility to protect people that made foolish decisions. And so, you know, if you think about who around here, maybe other than the President of the United States, has just intense pressure on them right now, Ben Bernanke has got to be feeling just incredible pressure. And he wants to do the right thing. And I think he probably worries a lot about his legacy being that he was the guy that created hyperinflation in the United States. My own view is he's going to cut rates because I think we've reached the point where he's got to protect the economy. Yes?
Can you talk a little bit about Wachovia's thoughts on global expansion and then what opportunities you see in other markets?
You know, it's somebody asked a question about judgment, and for me, that's a big one right now because we must get more global. And yet, I've got to convince our shareholders that we need to be more global. This is also one of those situations I was talking about where different constituencies want different things. Most of the time, your investors don't want you to change at all. They just want you to do as well as you did last week, again this week. But you and I know that a company can't keep doing that over time without changing. And for us, being more global is very important. And we've got two areas of our company that are focused on that. Our corporate and investment bank is expanding in Asia and in Europe, and our asset management business is expanding into other parts of the world. And we need to do that. And eventually, our general bank will do the same thing. I mean, in some ways, that's a power alley for our company. I just honestly believe we're the best general bank in the industry, and I think there are things that we do there that will work in India and other places around the globe, and we should eventually be migrating into those areas. But it's how fast, how much capital do you deploy, how much do you scare your shareholders by going too fast, those kinds of things. Way back in the cheap sheets.
You mentioned values, Ken. How did and who came up with the corporate values that Wachovia has?
Yeah.
As a leader, how do you push those values down into the trenches so that a teller here in Charlottesville makes basically the same value-based decisions that you make as CEO?
Yeah. You know, we are lucky at our company because we had a merger of equals where First Union and Wachovia came together. And we recognized that as an opportunity to, in effect, although we took the name Wachovia, we said we're going to create a new company. It's not going to be First Union and it's not going to be Wachovia, it's going to be a new company. And so literally the first thing we did as we started merger integration was we put together a process where 3,000 employees went through an exercise where they created the values that we would live by at the new company. And then those were endorsed by our management committee. But it was a very vigorous exercise, and you could see people from each side of the merger sort of trying to influence it one way or the other. And it was much like your group meetings, I think, at Darden, except there were a process of mini groups leading up to 3,000 people. But we sort of hashed out the way we wanted to live together, and that's how we came up with our values. And we used them. We talk about them, and when we have big decisions to make, we check them against our values. So I think the only way to make values real is when they actually are a yardstick that you use in how you make decisions.
So just as a follow-up to that,
yeah.
How do you take those values and push them down to like an A.G. Edwards after you acquire them?
We talk about them. When we go, we have town meetings with A.G. Edwards employees. I've been to St. Louis numerous times and met with groups just like this. And Danny Ludeman, who heads our securities business, has been on a 6-week barnstorming tour of the United States, visiting brokers all over the United States. And we talk about Wachovia, and we talk about what's important. And one of the things we talk about is our mission and our values. And the other thing we do, though, is we are very sensitive to the values of the acquired company coming in. And I think one of the things we do really well is we try to welcome new entrants into our company like they're coming into a family, rather than saying, okay guys, the train's leaving the station, either get on the train or get off the platform. So that's a way we operate. And if senior people in the company don't live by the values, people know it. And you know, as I was telling some people at lunch today, we weed out phonies at Wachovia pretty quickly. They just realize that they're in the wrong place at some point. Authenticity. We really look for authenticity. Yes?
Ken, as you look back over your ascension to CEO, what do you think was your most challenging role that you took on, and why?
Well, I've moved 7 times in 32 years, and one of the first moves I had was when interstate banking finally became legal. And I moved from Charlotte to Atlanta to head our bank in Atlanta. And I was so excited about the job. I couldn't believe how fortunate I was. I was going to build a bank in Atlanta. And one night I got a telephone call. I was already in bed asleep, and it was the CEO of the company, and he said, I want you to come back to Charlotte. And I had been in Atlanta at the time 6 months, not enough time to make much of a difference. And he said, I want you to come back to Charlotte, and I want you to head human resources. And, you know, I was bragging about being a rainmaker earlier. I thought he was telling me that I was fired, quite frankly. But I did it, and it was the best thing that ever happened to me, because I went from being in a line of business where I saw a very narrow part of our company to being head of human resources, where I saw how staff units intersect with line units. I saw from the top of the company down how things were done. And I was only in that job for 18 months, but it was like getting an MBA if you didn't have an MBA. And it was, it probably changed the way I look at how to do things. So it was a wonderful opportunity, which was disguised in what I thought was word to me that my career was not looking very good.
I think we have time for about 2 more questions.
Right there.
Hi. I just wanted to ask, except for the 2 qualities that you mentioned, like being ahead of change, what are the
Except for the 2 what? I'm sorry.
qualities that you
Okay.
mentioned, being
Yeah.
ahead of change and being aware of globalization?
Right.
And what are the 4 topmost qualities that you see that a leader should have?
That a leader should have? I think it goes back to the 6 things that I was talking about. It's what we look for: integrity, number 1. You got to be honest. You got to be straightforward. You've got to be self-aware, so you have to know how you're impacting the people around you. You got to be passionate about the business. Nobody is going to be excited about our company if I'm not excited about our company. And so I've got to be able to infect people with my enthusiasm. Now, you certainly can't be Pollyanna. I mean, when you're having problems, you got to talk about problems, but you got to be positive and optimistic. So I would say those things. And then you got to have technical skills. You can't be a good investment banker if you don't know anything about capital structures. So there are technical skills that you've got to have. But I would say overwhelming the technical skills are people skills. I just think they're critically important to great leadership. If I think back to my business school, what was the course that everybody thought, okay, I'm just going to sort of skate my way through here? It was organizational behavior, they used to call it. It was the most important course I took in business school, and I didn't realize it until I got out into the business world. Last question.
When you retire, what do you want to be remembered for?
I want to be remembered for making Wachovia a company in the global financial world that matters. So I don't know if we'll be the biggest company. I don't know if we'll have the biggest market cap. But in the businesses we're in, we will be a player, and we will be a player on a global stage. That's my vision of success for Wachovia. And that's going to take a long time, but it'll be fun getting there. Thank you all for your attention.